out, but shall be taken as read. Arising from it, therefore, there are two proposals simply to put to the House today. One is the proposal for dealing with today, Wednesday's business agreed to. Deputy McLaughlin, yes.
This is now the 6th week where the Dail is sitting on half the usual hours. Normally the Dail sits 33, 34 hours, Tuesday, Wednesday and Thursday. So we're sitting on half the time. What does that mean? That means we have no Taoiseach's questions, no Minister's questions. Instead of 3 private members' slots for dealing with legislation, we have 1. Reduced topical issues, promised legislation reduced, leaders' questions reduced. This is intolerable for the opposition, intolerable that this continues. But to add insult to injury, for the second time in 3 weeks, we have no opportunity for statements and questions to the Minister for Health on the public health response and the vaccine rollout, which is the very reason why we are reduced to half the time. It's intolerable, Taoiseach. And I'm saying to you now that this has to change. You're going to produce a schedule to the Business Committee tomorrow. And if you look at this Business Committee report here, yet again, for the 3rd week in a row, the opposition have registered their dissent. You're not listening to the opposition. You're preventing the opposition from doing our job in this democracy, which is to introduce, I'll finish in this kind of which is to introduce legislation and hold government to account. It has to stop this week. It has to stop this week.
Deputy Boyd Barrett.
Yeah, Taoiseach and Ceann, as we have stated for weeks now, it is completely unacceptable that the government is essentially using the COVID crisis to shield itself from legitimate questioning and accountability on a range of pressing issues for people in this country by limiting the time for debates, for Taoiseach's questions, and critically on the pandemic itself. In fact, breaking a commitment that there would be a standing debate on COVID and dealing with the pandemic. It's absolutely outrageous. I also, Ceann, though, want to mention something specifically on today's order, which is the Land Development Agency bill. We'll talk about the substance of it later. A bill, I believe, is essentially a heist of the public land banks in the interest of private developers. But, Ceann, this bill, which by any standards is probably one of the most important bills that will come before this House in the foreseeable future, did not go through pre-legislative scrutiny, nor did it seek a waiver from the Business Committee for a bill that is dealing with the entire public land bank.
Deputy.
Now that is unacceptable. There's a whole number of new heads in this bill dealing with how it's going to involve private investors in public land, definitions of affordable housing. None of it has been through pre-legislative scrutiny as it is required to do under the legislative process.
Thank you. Look, there's a number of people looking to contribute. We can't be having lengthy statements, please. Deputy Duncan Smith.
And Corla, look, it's a very difficult balancing act to strike during this time. There's no doubt about that. But we feel the balance is not being struck at the moment, and in particular, the standing request for a thorough debate on COVID. This is something we made prior to Christmas and have made it every week, and also in relation to Taoiseach's questions, which we feel there's an increasing need for. But I'll leave it at that. But it's our view, and you know, we don't necessarily vote against the order of business every week. We do it on a week-by-week basis, but we feel that balance isn't being struck at the moment, and we would ask that that would be taken to the Business Committee on Thursday. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Deputy Pringle.
Thank you, Lieutenant Colin. Just put on record our support of the stance of it. It's clear that the Dail has been used to stifle the government's response and to make sure to keep the government clear from any negative publicity in relation to what's happening. And there are genuine and legitimate questions that need to be asked and answered in relation to the government's handle of this whole COVID crisis as well. So I fully support at the very least we should be moving to a 3rd day for 6 hours or whatever to have a more hold.
Deputy Cian O'Callaghan.
I just want to say that I think it's completely unacceptable that each week at the Business Committee we request time for the most important issue in the country to be discussed and scrutinised in the Dáil, which is our entire management of the COVID crisis, and each week that request is not facilitated by the government. We should be sitting 3 days a week to do that. And I think this is a very bad look for the government not to be allowing that level of scrutiny. This is happening in a week where the government have turned away journalists from a press conference, in a week when the government have tried to change the SRI's critique of its housing policy. And I think in the interests of proper accountability and scrutiny, the government now should respond and have proper amount of time set aside for scrutiny and debate this week and in future weeks.
Thank you, Deputy Peadar Tobin.
Listen, accountability and democracy should not be a victim of COVID. Accountability and democracy are more important now in this crisis probably than they ever were. And the fact of the matter is that government ministers are being insulated from accountability within this chamber due to the lack of opportunity the opposition have to look at the crisis, let's say, in nursing homes, in the rollout of vaccines, in education and housing. And I would appeal for the government to support a return to a 3-day Dail week.
Thank you, Deputy Matthew McGrath.
We in the Rural Independents are trying to be constructive at these business committee meetings. We know how challenging the times are, but the government are hiding behind, shorter sittings and not enough debate on issues. And issues like the Land Development Agency, certainly, and the whole management or mismanagement of the COVID situation and the manipulation of figures and the situation with our schools, our hospitals, our frontline workers. It's just not good enough. So, with the size of this convention centre, surely to God, and the cost of it, that we'd be able to sit for a third 6-hour day, not long days. We understand the health and safety guidelines, but with the sheer space it is, people are asking us, in the name of God, why can you not sit there for longer? Because other people don't have the luxury of moving to a facility like this. We should show leadership and have proper scrutiny and debate and Taoiseach's questions and answers.
Thank you very much. But just before I call on the Taoiseach, can I, just as Chair of the Business Committee, say this very briefly? It's absolutely a matter for the House what business is transacted here each week. But to be fair and to be reasonable, the Business Committee, over an extended period of time, has tried to address the sittings of the Dáil, conscious of, number one, the public health advice, number two, our own health and safety consultants who have advised us, number three, the submissions that we have received from the union groups representing the staff that support us here at all times. And members of the Business Committee will be aware that the Clerk of the Dáil produced a comprehensive report some weeks ago setting out why the reduced sessions were felt to be necessary. But it is, at the end of the day, a matter for the House. Taoiseach.
First of all, I'm very surprised by the commentary and by the assertions from Deputy O'Loughlin through to Deputy Duncan Smith and Deputy Keena Callaghan, Deputy Boyd Barrett, and indeed Deputy O'Tobin and Deputy Matty McGrath, that somehow government is invoking COVID-19 as a basis for the 2-day sessions in terms of the Dáil. That is not the case. And the same deputies, some of the same deputies, would be very quick to attack government for ignoring public health advice, for ignoring health and safety. My understanding is that the Business Committee, collectively, irrespective of party, has been advised on public health grounds that this is the optimal way to proceed. Please contradict me if that's not the case. Please correct me if that is not the case. And also that there... sorry, please. No, government has not... Government has not ordained this or imposed this. But what I would say is
Taoiseach, without interruption,
we are in a very severe level 5, and it's not just the people who attend here, it's everybody behind the scenes that lead to a Dáil sitting happening. There's far more people involved than just the elected representatives. But the public health advice has guided the behaviour of the Parliament in relation to this, and I think that should be acknowledged. And I would say to you that numbers are still high out there. Like, society is in a very severe level of restrictions. We still have over 800 people in hospital, significant numbers in intensive care. Case numbers are still too high. We have a variant. If you look at the European Centre of Disease Control's report on Monday, it's saying the spread of disease and potential for the disease to spread is high to very high. That's the context in which we're all operating throughout society. And indeed, there's a Cabinet Committee meeting on Thursday in relation to COVID-19, where we'll engage with NEFIT and they will make a presentation, and I've spoken to the acting CMO. Our immediate priorities is a phased return for education, but it'll be phased. And we're talking about very limited situations after that. So that's where we are right now in terms of the battle against COVID and this variant. But if I could say, I'd have to say also that the programme actually has 3 debates on COVID. And every week it's been dominated by COVID. The Taoiseach is in tomorrow in terms of trade and employment on business and COVID. That's 133 minutes. There's earlier at 10 a.m. there's a statements and Q&A on drug and alcohol services, homelessness and COVID-19, which does need to be articulated and needs to be debated. The whole situation in terms of the homeless and COVID-19 and how it's impacting on the homeless right across the board. And to date, at 1 o'clock, the Minister for Agriculture, Food and Marine is in on COVID-19, agriculture, fisheries and the food sector, 135 fixed-minute debate in relation to that. So the government has approached COVID every week on a thematic basis. And in relation to the Land Development Agency legislation, there are a number of new heads, I acknowledge that. There was a similar bill, there's been significant additions that I acknowledge, but we do need to get on with the housing agenda, Deputy. And I think you've taken a rather propagandistic position on the bill, that's your entitlement. But the country are screaming for new houses to be built in this country.
Okay, we can't go into
detail. That's why that bill is tabled for deliberation and consideration. And I would just say, I did meet with the leader of the Sinn Féin party last evening, the consideration for debates in relation to Northern Ireland, for example, next week, if that's a desire. We're open to constructive engagement with the opposition in terms of how debates are developed, but the Business Committee ultimately is the correct forum.
Thank you, Taoiseach. The question now is that the business for today... Sorry, yes.
Very, very briefly, Count Order. The question was asked about public health. What has your refusal for 2 out of 3 weeks to refuse to bring the Minister for Health into this House to be accountable on the very issue that has locked us down for half of the hours that we normally sit? That is the public health response on vaccines. This is the second time, so 2 out of 3 weeks, you have refused what was understood to be a standing slot. So what's that got to do with the public health response?
Okay, thank you, Deputy.
Is in tomorrow morning.
No, just to be clear, and everybody in the opposition
knows
this.
The department heads are in tomorrow morning.
You know the question I'm asking. Answer the question.
But I am answering the question. Every week, we've had nearly a day, really, essentially, devoted to COVID. And it's not just all about vaccinations either, because the other issues do need to be dealt with and debated also.
Thank you, Taoiseach.
I think that's fair to say.
Sorry, Deputy Shortall, we can't hear you. Sorry.
For a long time now, there hasn't been an opportunity to have any debate on the government response to COVID. You announced your response this week. You're talking about another version of living with COVID. But you haven't allowed any debate within the Dáil on the government response. And that's just not acceptable. And when you combine that with the fact that there hasn't been any engagement with the opposition since last November, in terms of briefings. There's just no communication going on here at all.
Thank you, Deputy. Thank you.
Deputy Shortall has a habit of consistently and continually asserting something which is not true in terms of consultation. It's just not true.
All right. No, please, let's not... Please.
Met the groups and the leaders of the groups since last November. That's the fact of it.
Okay. The Chakti Tarhev na Tarishkana, the proposal for today's business. The proposal, please, deputies, for today's business. Is it agreed to?
Not agreed.
Not agreed to. The Chakti Tarhev na Tarishkana Abadish Ta, Shivshitana Gun Abadish Neil, Stolim Gullin Keshtrich, I believe the question is carried.
Vote all.
Vote all. Will deputies please move towards their designated seats? proposal number 1 on the order of business. The question is that the proposal for dealing with today, Wednesday's business, be agreed to, and on that question the division has been challenged. Tellers Thaw, Minister Jack Chambers and Deputy Cormac Devlin, Neil, Deputy Porrick McLaughlin and Deputy Thomas Pringle. Thaw 24, Neil 20, Tonkesh 3. Wednesday's business agreed to.